Hey folks, welcome to module number 3. Can't believe we're just flying by the semester. And I hope the content is teaching you something that you're learning about strategic planning and the whole idea around strategic management. Remember, the concept that we're looking at is the role of a leader who focuses on a skill called strategic management, which it involves strategic thinking, there's strategic planning, and then moving an organization with strategic momentum towards the goals. What we're going to do today in Module 3 is we're going to focus on what's called the internal analysis and competitive advantage. And it's really a pretty exciting topic, I think. And I hope that I'm not more excited than you are about the topics, but I know it's hard when you're a student working full time and trying to balance all of the different things that you've got on your plate. So, but I think it's great information, it's great content, and I hope you're getting something out of it that's really going to help you in your day-to-day work. So I want to remind you to stay on track with the assignments in the modules. Remember, the discussion questions are really important, and also the written assignments, because those are the tools that really test your gaining competency in the objectives that we have set. So make sure you start each week reading the introduction, reading the objectives to see what it is that's important for you. And what I've done each week is the chapter outlines a number of objectives, and I have highlighted which objectives I think are really the most important, which I'll gear my comments towards, and also will focus on in both the discussion posts and the written assignments. So nothing unusual this module. Same plan, got some PowerPoint slides to look at, my comments that I make in terms of the information that's in the text and also in the PowerPoints, a couple of assignments, and then there's some information I thought was really helpful that I found on the web that I provided for you under the scan section. Please make sure to look at those items. They'll give you a different perspective, kind of round out some of the learnings. And then I'll show you my what's next video after you're all done, and we can kind of summarize and then talk a little bit about our next module, which will be module 4. So again, looking forward to jumping into the material here that we've got for this week. So again, the topic for this week is the internal analysis and competitive advantage. And we've looked at the concept of external analysis. We've also looked at our service area competitive analysis. And so where the external analysis really asks what should we be doing compared to the market, the internal analysis really looks at what can an organization actually deliver on. And so even though the external analysis tells us, oh my gosh, this is what the other competitors are doing, the external analysis assessing the competition says, hey, everybody's moving in this direction. This is what's happening. This is what's shifting. These are the new pressures that are forces that are at work on us. The internal analysis, says what can we do? And so it's equally as important as an external analysis. Not what should we do, but the internal analysis, what can we do? The other thing that the internal analysis does is it helps us to identify our strengths and competitive advantages, and also our weaknesses. And it's also important to understand that when you're doing this analysis of an organization's strengths and weaknesses, that you're doing it in context of something that we call an organizational value chain. And this, again, is a concept that I think is really important. Want to make sure that you folks grasp the concept of the value chain. And really that relates to sort of the idea around what do you do before you sell a product or offer a service? What happens? What are the pieces that are involved in actually delivering or selling a service? And then what's the follow-up? Whether it's customer service to deal with a complaint, or whether it's the billing process. And so we'll look at all of those items, and those are really the value chain that you want to understand and that you want to begin to think about from a strategic thinking perspective. And remember, systems thinking is so critical for every leader, and it's an idea I want to really promote with all of you, and how you're viewing and thinking about things, and that when you look at it, even an internal analysis and the value chain, you want to look at it in context of systems thinking and how are all these things connected, and how are things scalable, and what are the downstream impacts and the upstream impacts. So we'll move on now. And want to look at the objectives. Again, I mentioned that there are learning objectives in the module, also in the textbook. There are a number of those, and I have highlighted a few key objectives that I think I'd like you to focus on. And really, I want you to understand how the external analysis really creates context for the internal analysis. And so how the external information that you've gotten really does put into perspective the work that you do around your internal analysis. What do we need to focus on as we look at the external environment? Talk about the value chain and how value chain should be used to identify your strengths and your weaknesses. And then the objective around determining the competitive reliance on each organizational strength and weakness. And so how valuable are knowing your strengths and weaknesses of an organization? And then how relevant competitively are the strengths and weaknesses that an organization has, and how do you use those strengths and weaknesses to develop strategic plans? As I mentioned a few minutes ago, the internal analysis is really focusing on what can we do based off of the external analysis that's telling us what should we do, and then it gives us the opportunity to identify both strengths and weaknesses. If you think back to our very first module, when we looked at the strategic management model, again, models are important, and we don't want this just to be an academic exercise, but really want to use it in real world thinking. We're still focusing on, of the three models, strategic thinking, strategic planning, and strategic momentum, we're still focusing on that strategic planning process. And there is a situational analysis bucket within strategic planning. There's the strategy formulation bucket, which will be our next module. And we'll begin to talk about that. And then the implementation component of it. So you're looking at what you need to do, you're beginning to build your strategy, and then you're planning for implementation. All those three things occur within strategic planning. And so within the situational analysis bucket, we've already looked at the external analysis. The second piece is the internal analysis, which we'll be focusing on today, as well as directional strategies is a part of that situational analysis. And so when you think about that, the three factors when you're developing your strategy, again, is your external environment, the internal strategies, what leadership wants to do, what leadership thinks is important, and then this internal environment now is going to begin to feed into our strategy development, adding a new layer of information around what capabilities do we have, what are our strengths and our weaknesses, and those can be a variety of things. And one of the items I want you to remember to be thinking about when you're doing an internal analysis is not just the strengths and weaknesses you may see in terms of technology or tangibles, but also cultural artifacts. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about the healthcare value chain. But it's so important that we understand the culture of an organization. And that really plays into what can we do. And oftentimes, what can we do? There's a bigger question, what do we want to do? And I think about my experience within the Blue Cross system and a number of Blue plans, and how Blue Cross organizations from a strategy perspective were never ahead of the market, never had the sort of viewpoint that those organizations wanted to be on the cusp, on the leading edge, jumping off, being a first responder. But really, oftentimes, the Blue Cross organizations thought of themselves as what they would call lagging leaders, where they were leaders in the marketplace, but they oftentimes waited to see what other organizations were going to do first, to minimize their risks of being ahead of the curve and finding things that fail. And so that's an example of what is a cultural artifact around an organization that does have an impact on what can an organization do. If the organization is focused on being a fast follower versus a cutting edge leader, that will definitely have an influence on developing your strategy. And those kind of things will evolve as you begin to do your internal analysis. There's 5 steps to the internal analysis process, and we'll review each one of those steps as we go through today's comments. And remember, All of these things are individual steps to help us think through the process, but really they're all related. You want to think about them holistically, and that you're focusing not only on the positive things that you discover when you assess the organization, but also focusing on the negative things. And keep in mind that organizations don't like negative information to be out in the information waves. Oftentimes, leaders in particular don't want weaknesses to be published in writing. And so there's always politics that get involved in how weaknesses are packaged. Oftentimes, and more often than not, weaknesses are minimized. And so it takes a lot of courage. And this is also why many times organizations use consultants, is because they would prefer to have someone from the outside come in and show an organization what its strengths and weaknesses are. Because more often than not, we are blind to our own weaknesses, and particularly putting them down on paper for others to review and judge us, and to make decisions about what we are not, or what we are doing, and what we should be doing, and what maybe we shouldn't be doing and haven't done in the past. So when you think about the internal analysis, remember that it is the first step is that you want to think about it in terms of the context of the external analysis that you complete, and also the competitor analysis. And remember that that external analysis really revolves around what's happening in the general environment, what's happening within the healthcare ecosystem around policy, governmental mandates, changes in care delivery approaches, what's happening within your service area from a competitor perspective, and then the organization that you sit in is, remember, nested within all of those forces. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. All of them play on each other, all of them interact with each other. And so you want to make sure that you're thinking about that external analysis when you're beginning your internal analysis, and then also the competitor analysis, which is critical. And you remember we talked about Porter's 5 points, or 5 focuses that really have an impact on the marketplace from a competitive perspective. And that was, the threat of new entrants coming into the market, and what's the rivalry temperature among organizations? Are there other new products coming out that can be substituted for what your organization currently produces? And what's the bargaining power of both buyers and suppliers to organizations? And so how does the customers and the partners of any organization really have an impact on the competitive marketplace? Step number 2 is an important step. And I love the slide that is in the PowerPoints and the materials around understanding the value chain. And I don't think people spend enough time thinking about this. Again, this is a holistic view of an organization. So many times leaders focus on their small area, on what they do, and not on the bigger picture. And so the reason why I really love this slide is I think it expands our thinking around what is the value chain of an organization. And really there's 3 key points in that slide. There's the pre-service component, what's identified as something called post-service, and then something that's identified as after service. And then surrounding around those 3 areas, there are organizational culture, there's organizational structure, which focuses on things like how's the organization set up from an org chart perspective, what are the reporting relationships like, and then there's resource considerations around financial resources, human resources, technology resources, what's the information system. And so these are all of the areas that really need to be evaluated from a strength and a weakness perspective when you're understanding your value chain and when you're doing your internal analysis. And so it's not a quick, easy assignment. It really takes a tremendous amount of focus and attention and work and manpower that needs to be contributed and dedicated to really looking at the value chain and what's working really well and what's not working really well. And when you think about value chain, the value chain having the point of service component and then the after service component, that can be applied to every single organization, every single type of product that you can think of, whether it's healthcare, whether it's banking, whether it's Amazon selling you a product online, whether it's getting service at Nordstrom's. everyone focuses around pre-service, post-service, and after-service components. And the book does a nice outline of all of the things that are within those different areas. And so you're going to want to have a process for assessing the strengths and weaknesses of the entire value chain. The third step is really then identifying the strengths and weaknesses of the value chain. And so step 3 is really your strengths and weaknesses identification. And really looking at focusing on not only the positives, but what are the negatives within these different areas. And so many organizations, you'll find that they really do a great job in marketing and promoting their products. But when you get into the service experience, when they come in for care or for something else, everything breaks down. Or their after service functions don't work well. You can think about when you look at a health plan and how perhaps the pre-service authorization process works very, very well within making sure that members can get care in the environment where they're receiving services. But then when we talk about claims reimbursement and we talk about payment, we talk about resolving all of that and the customer experience process in terms of if a member or a provider needs to re-engage with the health plan after a service has been provided, what happens in that space? And so you can see that unless you're thinking about the value chain across the entire chain, all of the different components, you can miss valuable information that will help you in your internal analysis to really understand what it is that makes an organization strong or weak. And really the value chain is really the key to helping an organization identify its competitive advantage. Because really that's what it's all about, is that how do you really look at your value chain? Because organizations, particularly in the same space, health plans, car dealers, airlines, their value chain looks very similar. I mean, you think about a airline company. They sell tickets, they fly people around, and then they have the experience within a plane, and then there's the post-service, maybe the baggage component, the baggage delivery experience. And that really is the areas that those organizations focus on. And they want to make sure that every single one of those 3 sort of functional areas, pre-service, delivery, and then the follow-up, that all of those areas are working well. And you can think about Amazon, and they really have done a great job in terms of getting that product in front of you, then delivering the product, and then, boy, what a great experience with Amazon when you have something and you have a Prime membership or you want to return and there's no charge, no cost. And it just makes the experience so amazing. So understanding the value chain is really important, and that really gives us a competitive advantage when you really begin to work on the areas that have weakness, and you also maximize those areas that are already strong. And some of the tangible competitive advantage considerations are maybe finding strong financials. You could be in a good location that's convenient. You could have excellent technology, equipment, you could have good facilities. And then some of the intangible things would be, your reputation. That we think about, for example, Blue Cross. Again, the Blue Cross brand is so powerful. An organization could have strong leadership. They could have a great culture. And so all those things could be potential points of advantage. And then the 4th step is to identify the competitive advantage within the value chain and really asking the question to determine whether or not something is an advantage that is a component of the organization. Is it valuable in the marketplace? Is it something that we do that other organizations don't do? Is it easy for other organizations to imitate? If another company can come in and do what you do quickly and easily, it may not be a competitive advantage, because again, our goal is to identify what advantages do we have as an organization that makes us competitive over those who we compete with in our service area. And then is a competitive advantage that we have sustainable? Is it able to last through time? So when you think about evaluating your internal strengths, weaknesses, you want to really ask yourself some questions. And these are in the slides, but I want to walk through them with you. And just a reminder also, oftentimes I take pieces of the slides when I walk through, make my comments. So um, I'm in an order that's sequential to the slides that are posted. I don't use all of them. But if you'd like to look um, at those slides when I'm walking through my comments, it might be helpful for you. But there's a number of questions in one of the slides that's guidelines for evaluating some of the strategic assumptions that you may make. And all those are really, really important. And you want to make sure that you're identifying all the strengths and weaknesses that are available and that are prevalent in an organization. And then you want to understand, does the strategy that you have exploit those strengths and avoid additional and new major weaknesses? So you want to make sure that um, you're thinking about the direction that you take the organization, that you're focusing on avoiding new weaknesses by the direction that you're going to be going. So look at those questions for evaluating some of your assumptions. I think that you'll find them super helpful. So the fourth step too, when you're identifying your current and potential advantages, you want to make sure that you are asking those questions that I pointed out about the strategic um, value of the things that you identify. And so that's an overview of the content for the module. There is in the slides additional information that refers to ABC Long-Term Care Facility. And the authors outlined an excellent way of looking at some of the external environmental components, some of the strengths and the weaknesses, some critical success factors. And there's other information I want you to review that will go along with the text nicely, and that also gives you a good example of what should this look like in a practical way. And so I hope that you find that to be helpful for you as you go through that information, and that you begin to get a sense of the importance of internal analysis, particularly when you think about it around the idea of the healthcare value chain and the value chain of your organization. There is a assignment in the module around the organizational value chain. So I'll look forward to hearing your thoughts on that. I'm sure that you'll have some great ideas on how the value chain is working itself out in the organization that you choose.